The man returned home late in the evening, his shoulders heavy from the long day, his eyes tired but searching for the comfort of the one thing that always gave him peace, his own space. The small parking spot beside his house that he had used for years. The place where his car rested safely every night like a trusted companion. But as he drove down the familiar street, something felt wrong. Something caught his eyes before he even reached the spot, and his heart gave a sharp pull inside his chest. There was a strange car sitting where his car should have been. A shiny sedan with tinted windows, bold as if it belonged there, blocking him out completely, and for a moment he blinked twice, thinking maybe his tired mind was playing tricks. Maybe he had parked somewhere else the night before. Maybe he had forgotten. But no, he never forgot. That spot was his. His name was on the papers. He had parked there since the first day he bought the house. Nobody else had the right to even touch it, let alone take it. His fingers tightened on the steering wheel as he slowed down in disbelief. The sound of his tires crunching on the gravel felt louder than usual, and as he pulled closer, his eyes moved to the left corner where a new metal sign had been drilled into the ground. A sign he had never seen before, sharp white letters against a green background that read, Community Property Parking, HOA Regulated. His chest tightened and his mouth went dry. He leaned forward in his seat as if getting closer would change the words. But they stayed the same, cold and smug, mocking him with every letter. His heart began to pound harder, anger mixing with confusion, and he parked his car awkwardly on the side of the road, half blocking the street. His eyes never leaving the sign or the intruding car, as if by staring long enough he could make them disappear. But they remained, bold and unmoving, symbols of something bigger than just a stolen spot. He stepped out slowly, the cool air hitting his face, his footsteps echoing against the pavement as he walked toward the spot that was no longer his, or at least that's what the sign claimed, and each step carried the weight of disbelief, of betrayal, of a silent question repeating in his mind. How could they dare? How could anyone think they could simply take away what belonged to him, what was in his deed, what was in his right? He touched the sign, his fingers tracing the edges of the letters, half expecting it to be some kind of prank. Maybe someone had stuck it there for a joke. But no, it was drilled deep into the ground, firm and official, and the strange car sat there silently, its black windows hiding the driver if there even was one, like a shadow guarding the theft. His jaw clenched, and he looked around at the quiet houses, the neat lawns, the closed curtains. He wondered if the neighbors were peeking from behind their windows, watching him, maybe even laughing quietly, because in neighborhoods like this news spread fast, and he knew the HOA was always at the center of it. They were the kind of people who thrived on control, on rules, on reminding everyone that they were the ones in charge. And now they had stepped directly into his life, crossed a line they should never have crossed. He pulled out his phone and took pictures, first of the car, then of the sign, then the wider view showing the spot and his house in the background. He wanted evidence, proof that this was real, that this was happening. But even as he clicked the pictures, a storm brewed inside him, because proof would not change the insult. Proof would not take away the fact that his spot, his property, had been stolen from him, not by a stranger, but by the very board that claimed to protect the community. His mind raced back to every past meeting with the HOA, the smug faces of the board members sitting at the long table, talking down to homeowners, issuing fines for the smallest things, grass too long, trash bins left outside a few minutes late, decorations not approved, always acting like kings in a land they did not own. And he realized this was not a mistake. It was never a mistake. This was a move, deliberate and planned, a way to test him, to see if he would bend like so many others. His fists clenched at his side as he stood there longer, staring at the enemy car sitting on his land, and he felt something rise inside him, not just anger, not just frustration, but a deep fire that came from the core, a stubbornness he had inherited from his father who once told him, never let anyone take what is yours, never bow to arrogance, never let the powerful walk over you. And tonight those words echoed in his ears louder than ever. He thought of driving to the HOA president's house right then, banging on the door, demanding answers, shouting until they removed the car and the sign. But another voice inside him whispered, no, not yet. Don't go blind into their trap. Don't show your cards too soon. They think you are powerless. Let them think it. Let them laugh. Let them dig their own hole deeper. And when the time is right, strike in a way they will never forget. He looked again at the sign, at the car, and then back at his own car parked awkwardly on the street, vulnerable to tickets, to towing, to the pettiness of the board, and his lips pressed into a hard line. This was only the beginning. He could feel it. This was not just about a parking spot. This was war, and they had just fired the first shot. The night grew colder as he finally turned away, walking back to his car with heavy steps. But inside his chest the fire only grew hotter, brighter, sharper. Each beat of his heart saying the same thing over and over. They dared to take what was his, and soon they would learn. Soon they would regret it, because they had no idea who they were dealing with. He drove off slowly, his eyes catching the last glimpse of the car in his spot through the rearview mirror, and in that moment he swore to himself that one day soon that car would be gone. The sign would be gone, and the HOA would pay for underestimating him. They thought they could take his spot, but they had just declared a battle, and he was ready to fight to the very end. The next morning the man woke with a heavy weight on his chest. The memory of the stolen spot burned in his mind, and as he sat at the edge of his bed staring at the floor he knew he could not let this pass. The board had crossed the line and he would face them. So he dressed quickly, grabbed the folder that held his house papers, and drove toward the HOA office, each turn of the wheel tight with anger. His car rolling past houses that seemed too quiet, too perfect, like they were all part of the board's kingdom. But his eyes stayed sharp, his jaw stiff, because today he was not going to bend. The HOA office sat in a converted clubhouse at the edge of the neighborhood. Glass doors, polished tiles, a flag outside waving as if the place had real authority. And when he pushed open the doors the cool air inside greeted him, but it was not refreshing. It was cold in another way, the way of control, of rules written on papers stacked neatly in files. And behind the counter a receptionist lifted her eyes, her smile too practiced, her tone too polite when she said, "Do you have an appointment?" And he shook his head, his voice low but steady as he said he needed to speak to the board. He needed answers now. The woman hesitated, then called someone inside, and within minutes 2 board members appeared, both dressed in neat shirts, faces full of the same arrogance he remembered from meetings, and one of them, the tall one with silver glasses, smirked as if he already knew why the man had come. And he said calmly, "Is this about the parking? Because if it is, you should know it's community property now, the rules have been updated." And his tone carried no respect, only dismissal, as if the man's rights were nothing more than dust under their shoes. The man stepped closer, his fists tightening at his sides, his voice sharper now. He told them that spot had always been his. It was part of his deed. It was private property, and no board could erase that. But the second man chuckled, leaning against the counter, saying things change. The community voted, the majority rules. Maybe you should keep up instead of clinging to old papers. And their laughter, small and cruel, echoed in the empty lobby, each note striking him like a whip. But he did not flinch, he did not back down. His eyes stayed locked on them, burning, and he told them clearly, "You cannot just take what belongs to me, and one day soon you will see what happens when you push too far." They exchanged looks, amusement flickering across their faces, and the one in glasses leaned forward, lowering his voice to something sharp. "You think you can fight us? You think you can stand alone? We have the rules, we have the signatures, we have the power, you have nothing." And with that final insult they turned their backs on him, walking back through the doors into their meeting room, leaving him standing there with his chest rising and falling like a storm trapped inside a cage. He did not chase them, he did not shout. Instead he stood still, letting the silence wrap around him, letting their words sink in, and then slowly he turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy but steady, because deep inside he knew they were wrong. He knew they had overstepped, and though they thought he had nothing, he had something they had forgotten, something that would soon shatter their smug control. He reached his car, sat behind the wheel, and for a moment stared at his hands gripping the steering tightly, his reflection in the windshield showing a man who had been mocked, dismissed, but not broken, never broken, and he whispered to himself, "Let them laugh now, because the day will come when their laughter turns to silence, and when it does, I will be the one standing." Then he started the engine, the roar of the car mixing with the storm inside him, and drove away from the office, not defeated, but sharper, more determined, and ready for the fight that was only just beginning. That evening the man sat on his porch staring at the quiet street, the shadows of the streetlights stretching across the pavement, and every time his eyes drifted to his stolen parking spot he felt the same twist in his chest, the same fire building deeper. But now it was not just anger. It was something colder, heavier, because the memory of the board members laughing at him played over and over in his mind, their voices mocking, their faces smug, and he knew they would not stop, they would push harder. They would humiliate him more if he stayed still. And so he waited, silent, watching as neighbors walked by, some glancing at him with pity, some pretending not to see him at all, as if his fight had already been lost, as if siding with him was too dangerous, and that cut deeper than their stares, because once these same neighbors had shared smiles, greetings, even trust. But now they whispered in corners, afraid of the board, afraid of losing their comfort. When the sun dipped lower and the lights inside the houses flickered on, he stood and walked slowly toward the spot, his eyes scanning the ground, the sign, the bold car that sat like a thief guarding stolen treasure, and he crouched low, running his fingers over the fresh marks where the post had been drilled in. The soil disturbed, the concrete cracked slightly, proof that this was done quickly, without warning, without care, as if they knew he would object and wanted to strike first before he could stop them. He rose again and turned his gaze toward the houses, toward the people hiding behind curtains, and he wondered how many of them had voted, how many of them had agreed to steal from him, or how many had simply stayed quiet, letting the board do as it pleased. And the silence of the street answered him, silence that told him no one would stand beside him, not now, not until they saw what he was capable of. Later that night, as the air grew colder and the street emptied, he sat at his desk inside, pulling open drawers, searching through old files and folders, the papers of his house, the maps, the deeds, his father's notes, each page carrying history, each word a reminder of what was his. And as he spread them across the table, his eyes caught details he had overlooked before. Lines drawn on maps showing boundaries not just of his house but of the small road leading into the subdivision. Words written in legal language that hinted at ownership beyond the simple parking space, and his breath caught, his hand freezing on the paper, because suddenly he realized there was more at play, more than the board had ever considered, more than even he had considered, and for the first time in days his lips curled into a small, cold smile, not of joy but of revelation. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the papers as the storm inside him shifted, no longer aimless rage but sharp direction, and he whispered into the empty room, "You think I have nothing, but you have no idea what I hold. You laugh now, but soon you will not laugh, soon you will see what it means to steal from me." Sleep did not come easily, his mind kept spinning, turning over each memory, each word spoken in that office, each smirk on their faces, and he imagined the day he would walk into their meetings not as a man mocked but as a man holding the one truth that would shatter them, the one card that would flip their power upside down. And with that thought, with that quiet promise to himself, he finally drifted into restless sleep. The papers spread across the desk like weapons waiting to be used, the shadows in the room whispering that the battle had only just begun. The next morning the man woke with the same fire in his chest, the images of the papers still sharp in his mind, and as the sun spilled through the thin curtains he rose quickly, not with the heaviness of defeat but with the weight of a plan forming, a plan that needed proof, because though he had read the words late at night, he needed more than old memories, he needed records, clear and undeniable. So he dressed, grabbed the worn folder, and drove into town, his car moving fast down the road. While his mind replayed every insult from the board, every mocking glance, every whisper of neighbors who thought him powerless, and with each mile his determination grew stronger, his grip on the wheel tighter, until at last he reached the city records office, a tall, plain building with glass doors that reflected the morning light. Inside, the smell of paper and ink mixed with the faint hum of computers, and behind the counters clerks moved slowly, their eyes dull from routine. But when he stepped forward, his voice carried none of their tiredness, his tone was firm, steady. When he asked for the property maps, the original surveys, the road deeds linked to his house, and though the clerk raised an eyebrow at the request, they shuffled away and returned with a stack of files, thick and heavy, the kind that held decades of history. He sat at a long table, pulling one document after another, scanning lines, tracing maps, and as his eyes moved across the faded ink a chill ran down his spine. Because it was all there, clear and undeniable. The small road that cut into the subdivision was not community land. It was private. It was listed under the same deed as his house, his father's name on the earliest record, then signed over to him years later. The boundary lines sharp and clear, and in that moment the truth solidified. He did not just own a parking spot, he owned the very road that gave the subdivision its life. The road that every neighbor used, the road the board pretended to control but never truly had. His breath came slow and deep, his fingers trembling as he traced the lines on the map, because the weight of this discovery was enormous, bigger than the board could ever imagine. And as he leaned back in the chair staring at the ceiling, he felt a strange calm wash over him. A calm that only comes when a man knows he has the upper hand, even if his enemy does not yet see it. He copied the papers, folded them neatly into his folder, and walked out of the building with steady steps. The morning air cooler now, fresher, as if the world itself knew something had shifted, something powerful. And when he sat in his car again, he did not feel tired, he did not feel beaten. He felt alive, sharper than ever before, because now he had the weapon, the one piece of truth that could turn the board's smug smiles into fear. On the drive back, he passed through the subdivision slowly, his eyes sweeping over the houses, the perfect lawns, the decorations that had once drawn fines, and he wondered how many of these people even knew the truth, how many of them realized that the very road under their wheels belonged not to the HOA but to him. And his lips curled into a small smile, cold and determined, because soon they would know, soon everyone would know. When he reached home, he spread the papers across the table again, studying them in detail, marking points, reading the legal language twice, 3 times, until there was no doubt left, no room for error. And as the hours passed, his plan grew clearer, step by step. He would not reveal this too quickly. He would not storm into a meeting with nothing but rage. No, he would let them push harder, let them show their arrogance, let them expose themselves fully. And then, when the moment was perfect, he would strike, and the entire board, the entire neighborhood, would see who truly held the power. That night, as the street outside grew dark again and the same strange car still sat in his spot, he no longer looked at it with anger, no longer with helpless frustration, but with a calm patience, like a hunter watching prey that did not yet know it was trapped, and he whispered under his breath, "Take it for now, take it while you can, because soon this street will not belong to you, soon it will not belong to them, it will belong only to me. And when that day comes, you will regret ever crossing me." The next day the man woke with a different kind of energy, not the restless fire of anger but the steady heat of focus, his mind already fixed on the papers laid out across his desk, the maps, the deeds, the signatures that proved what the board had chosen to ignore. And as he sat at the table sipping a cup of black coffee, he thought carefully, step by step, about how to use this truth, because power was nothing if used too soon, it had to be timed. It had to be delivered when the enemy believed they had already won. Only then would the blow crush them completely. He spent the morning making copies, not just 1 or 2 but several, each sealed into an envelope, one for a lawyer, one for the city office, one hidden safely in his home, because he knew the board would fight dirty, they always did, and he would not give them the chance to bury what he had uncovered. Then he drove into town again, this time to meet a surveyor, an older man who had worked in the area for years, and he laid the papers before him, asking him to check, to confirm, and the surveyor adjusted his glasses, studied the lines, measured the distances, and finally leaned back with a slow nod. "Yes, the road is yours. It always was, no mistake about it. It falls under your property deed." And with those words the last shred of doubt vanished, replaced by the steel certainty of victory, waiting just ahead. Driving back, he passed the clubhouse again, the same flag fluttering outside, the same cars of board members parked neatly in a row, and he imagined walking in there now, slamming the papers down, watching their smug faces twist into panic. But he held himself back. Not yet. Patience, patience, he reminded himself, because a storm does not strike with the first dark cloud, it builds, it gathers, and when it falls it destroys everything in its path. So he returned home, parked on the side of the road once more because his spot remained stolen, the strange car still sitting there like a scar. And as he stepped out he caught sight of 2 neighbors across the street whispering, their eyes flicking toward him, one of them laughing softly as if mocking his defeat. And though it burned inside him he gave no reaction, only a calm nod as he walked into his house, because he wanted them to believe he had lost. He wanted the whole neighborhood to think he was powerless, because then, when he revealed the truth, their shock would be complete. That evening he sat on his porch again, folder resting on his lap, and as the sun dipped below the trees and the first streetlights flickered on, he imagined the chain reaction that was coming. The board pushing harder, trying to fine him, trying to humiliate him, until the day he turned their own arrogance back on them. And the thought filled him with a quiet satisfaction. He remembered his father's words once more, never strike in anger, strike when your enemy thinks you are weakest, and his heart steadied because he knew that moment was coming soon. When the night grew late he went back inside, locking the papers safely away, then stood by the window staring at the parked car in his spot. The sign beside it glowing faintly under the streetlight, and instead of rage he felt something different, almost a cold amusement. Because that sign was not a mark of their victory, it was a countdown to their defeat, and only he knew how little time they had left. The next week began with the man waking to the sound of a tow truck outside, the deep growl of the engine shaking the windows, and when he rushed to the door he saw his own car hooked up to chains, the bright yellow slip already slapped across the windshield, and two men in uniforms tightening the clamps around his tires, and standing nearby with folded arms was one of the board members, the tall man with the silver glasses, his smirk sharp in the morning light as he said loudly enough for the neighbors to hear, "Community rules must be followed. You cannot block the road. This is your final warning." The man felt heat rise in his chest, but he did not shout. He did not curse. He only watched carefully, memorizing every detail, every word. Because this was exactly what he had waited for. Their arrogance growing so blind they no longer even tried to hide it. And as the truck pulled his car away and the board member turned with a look of victory on his face, the man simply closed his door, walked back inside, and opened the folder of papers once more, reminding himself of the truth that lay hidden inside, the truth that would soon crush them. The day passed with whispers drifting through the street, neighbors shaking their heads, some laughing, some whispering that he should just give up, that the board always won. And though their words carried through the air like knives, he ignored them, because he saw what they did not. He saw the trap the board was building around themselves, each action, each fine, each humiliation another brick in the wall that would collapse on their heads when he finally revealed the truth. That evening he received a letter shoved under his door, the HOA seal stamped in red across the top, and as he opened it his eyes scanned the printed words, violation notice, continued misuse of community space, failure to comply with parking regulations, fine of $500 due immediately, further action will result in legal consequences, and he almost laughed, not with joy but with the dark amusement of a man who knew the enemy was too blind to see they were tightening the rope around their own necks. He placed the letter in his folder beside the deed, the survey maps, the city records, and whispered under his breath, "Keep going, keep pushing, because every step you take brings you closer to the fall." The following days the board grew bolder, sending patrols down the street to photograph his house, warning slips taped to his door about grass length, about trash bins, about anything they could twist into a rule, and each time he watched silently, his neighbors watching too, believing he was a man beaten, a man too weak to fight. But in truth every insult only sharpened his patience, every fine only made his eventual strike heavier. And at night as he sat in the dark staring at the stolen spot outside, the same car parked there under the glow of the streetlight, he felt no despair, only a slow steady build of anticipation, like the coiling of a storm that grows stronger with every hour until it cannot be contained. One evening as the board members held their weekly meeting in the clubhouse, he stood at his window watching the glow of lights from across the neighborhood, imagining their laughter, their plans, their certainty that they had already broken him. And he let the thought linger in his mind, because soon that same room would echo with silence, their voices stolen by shock when he walked in with the truth in his hands, the truth that would not only return his spot but strip them of their power, the truth that the road beneath their feet was his, had always been his, and without it their rules meant nothing. And as the night grew late and the air outside turned colder, he whispered once again into the silence of his home, "You think I have nothing, but soon you will see everything. Soon you will understand what it means to steal from me." The night of the monthly HOA meeting arrived, the air heavy with the smell of rain and the weight of tension that seemed to hang over the entire neighborhood. And as the man stood in his living room staring at the folder on the table, he felt his heart beat steady, not rushed, not nervous, but steady like a drum that signaled the march of an army, because tonight he would no longer remain silent. Tonight he would step into their den and show them what they had chosen to ignore, what they had mocked and laughed at without realizing it would be the rope around their own necks. He picked up the folder, tucked it under his arm, and stepped outside into the cool night, his shoes crunching softly against the damp pavement as he walked toward the clubhouse at the end of the street. The lights glowing brightly inside, voices carrying faintly through the glass windows, laughter and chatter of people who thought themselves untouchable. And as he pushed the door open, all eyes turned to him, the room falling quieter. Curious glances mixing with smirks from the board members, who sat at their long table in the center, their arms crossed, their expressions already sharpened with arrogance. The man walked forward slowly, each step echoing in the room, and without asking permission he placed the folder on the table. The sound of it hitting the wood sharp and final, and then he looked directly at the board president. His voice calm but firm as he said, "You've been laughing at me, you've been stealing from me. But tonight that ends. Tonight I show you the truth you have ignored for too long." A murmur spread through the crowd of homeowners sitting in folding chairs, whispers rising as the man opened the folder and spread out the papers one by one. First the deed to his house, then the original property map, then the city records, each document laid down like a weapon, and finally the surveyor's report, fresh and stamped, confirming what they had denied. The board members leaned forward, their smirks faltering as their eyes scanned the words, their fingers tracing the lines of the map, and slowly the color drained from their faces when they saw what was written clearly in black ink: the parking spot belonged to him. And more than that, the entire road leading into the subdivision fell under his deed, private property, signed and sealed long before the HOA had even been formed. The room grew silent, neighbors shifting in their seats, some gasping softly, others whispering in disbelief. And the man's eyes never left the board as he spoke again. Each word slow and deliberate. "You ticketed my car, you towed it, you fined me, you laughed at me. But all along you were trespassing on my land. All along you were enforcing rules on a road that was never yours. And now I have every right to close it. Every right to make this street unbuildable. Every right to take back what is mine." The tall man with silver glasses tried to speak, his voice stumbling as he muttered something about majority votes and community rules. But his words fell flat, drowned by the weight of the papers on the table, drowned by the truth that no rule, no vote, no arrogant laugh could erase. And when he realized it, his lips pressed shut, his eyes darting to the other board members for help, but they too sat frozen, pale and shaken, their power unraveling before everyone's eyes. The neighbors stared, some wide-eyed, some almost smiling in secret satisfaction, because many of them too had felt the board's heavy hand, had felt the sting of unfair rules, and now, for the first time, they saw the board cornered, stripped of the control they had wielded for years. The man stood tall, his shoulders squared, his face calm, not triumphant but steady, like a judge delivering a verdict, and he gathered the papers back into the folder, leaving the silence heavy in the room before turning toward the door, his voice carrying one last time as he said, "You thought I was weak, you thought I had nothing, but now you know whose land you walk on, whose road you drive on, and whose spot you dared to steal. This is not your victory. This is your end." Then he walked out, the sound of his footsteps fading into the night, leaving behind a room full of silence, shock, and the first cracks in the empire the board had built, cracks that would soon split wide open. The following days the neighborhood buzzed like a disturbed hive, whispers flowing from one house to another, neighbors stopping in driveways, at mailboxes, at sidewalks, their voices low but urgent as they spoke of the meeting, of the papers the man had laid before the board, of the way their faces had drained of color when the truth stared back at them in black and white. And while some still doubted, calling it exaggeration or a trick, most knew deep inside that what they had seen was real, that the balance of power had shifted, and that the man who once sat alone on his porch watching his stolen spot now held something far greater than they ever imagined. The board, however, did not sit quietly. They scrambled in the days that followed, sending out emails filled with long sentences of legal language, trying to reassure the community that nothing had changed, that the rules still stood, but every word only sounded weaker, every message only revealed their fear, because the truth had already taken root, and the man watched all of it calmly from his window, the folder of papers resting safely on his desk, no longer just proof but a sword ready to strike. On the third day he made his move, walking into the city planning office with the same steady steps, handing over copies of the documents to the officials, and in a calm voice he declared what the board had refused to admit, that the road leading into the subdivision was private property, that no construction, no expansion, no alteration could be done without his permission. And when the clerk stamped the papers and entered them into the official record, the declaration became law, unbuildable, untouchable, sealed with ink that no board meeting could erase. Driving back through the subdivision he felt the weight of silence around him, neighbors peeking from windows, children stopping their play to watch his car roll slowly down the street. And when he pulled over near his house, the sight of the same HOA sign mocking him no longer stirred anger. It stirred something else, a deep satisfaction, because he knew that sign was already worthless, already broken, a false crown toppled by the truth. That evening the board called an emergency meeting. Their cars lined up outside the clubhouse, lights blazing inside as voices rose, angry and desperate. But the man did not go. He did not need to, because the papers were stronger than any words, and while they argued and shouted inside, he sat calmly at his table, sipping tea. His eyes steady on the window where the stolen spot still sat in the glow of the streetlight, and he thought to himself, "Fight all you want, scream all you want, but your fate is already sealed, because I now hold the ground under your feet." The next morning the first ripple hit, a letter delivered not by the board but by the city itself, stamped official, announcing that due to property ownership the road was now classified as private. All future building permits suspended until the rightful owner gave consent. And when copies of the notice reached every mailbox the neighborhood trembled. Because for the first time the board's control cracked in public, no denial, no email could erase it. Neighbors gathered in small groups, some angry, some confused, some secretly pleased, and though many did not approach the man directly, their glances said everything, a mixture of fear, respect, and curiosity, as if they were seeing him for the first time not as a victim but as the one holding the invisible chains of their lives. The board sent out more letters, desperate threats dressed as legal warnings, but each one rang hollow, and when the man held them in his hands he almost smiled, because he could feel it now, the shift, the turning of the tide, the slow crumble of the empire they had built on arrogance, and he whispered to himself in the quiet of his home, "You thought you could take a spot, but now you have lost an entire street. You thought you were kings, but I am the ground you stand on, and I have declared it unbuildable." That night he stepped outside, the cool air brushing against his face, and for the first time in weeks he did not look at the stolen spot with rage. He looked at it with certainty, with the calm of a man who knew the battle was almost over, because though the board would thrash and resist, their power was already broken, and soon the whole neighborhood would see that the man they mocked was now the one who controlled everything. The storm finally broke on the night of the next community gathering. The board had called everyone to the clubhouse in a desperate attempt to regain control. Their emails filled with urgent pleas for unity, their voices promising solutions. But when the man walked into the room carrying the same folder that had already stripped them bare, the whispers began before he even reached the front. Neighbors leaning into each other, eyes wide, some filled with fear, some with anticipation, because they all knew what he carried and what it meant. The board sat at their table looking thinner than before, their confidence cracked, the silver glasses of the tall man no longer gleaming with arrogance but trembling faintly as he tapped a stack of useless papers in front of him. And when the man took his place in the center of the room he did not raise his voice, he did not shout. He simply laid down the letter from the city, the declaration that the road was private and unbuildable without his consent, and the silence that followed was heavier than any shout could have been. The neighbors read the notice, their eyes moving quickly across the words, and the truth spread like fire, undeniable, unstoppable, and soon the silence broke into murmurs, then sharp questions. Why did the board lie? Why did they fine him? How could they ticket his car when it was on his own land? And slowly the crowd's voices grew louder, angrier, turning not toward the man but toward the board who had stood above them for so long. The tall man with glasses tried to speak, his words tumbling awkwardly, excuses about community unity, about mistakes, about misunderstandings. But the neighbors no longer listened, their faces hard, their voices sharp, and one by one they began to rise from their seats, pointing, demanding answers, demanding accountability, and the board that once ruled with fear now sat cornered like children caught in a lie. The man watched it all silently, his hands resting on the folder, his eyes calm, because he no longer needed to shout, he no longer needed to fight. The truth had already done the work, and now the neighbors themselves carried it forward, their anger aimed at the ones who had tricked them, fined them, humiliated them. When the noise grew to a roar the man finally stood, lifting a hand, and the room fell quiet once more, every eye fixed on him, and he spoke slowly, his voice deep and steady. "I did not come here to destroy. I came here to protect what is mine. But you forced me, you mocked me, you pushed me, and now you see what happens when arrogance blinds you." The board looked at him with pale faces, their power gone, and the man continued, "The road is mine, the law has confirmed it, the city has confirmed it, and from this day forward no plan, no project, no sign can stand without my permission. If you wish to use it you will follow my conditions. If you wish to pass, you will respect my rules. If you wish to stay in this neighborhood you will remember that the ground beneath you does not belong to your board. It belongs to me." The weight of his words settled over the room, and though some neighbors looked uneasy, most nodded slowly, their anger still directed at the board, their respect for the man quietly rising, because he had faced what none of them had dared to face. He had stood against the board and won. The board members exchanged desperate glances, their lips tight, their eyes hollow, because they knew it was over. Their kingdom collapsed in a single night, and now the man they mocked stood above them, not with shouts, not with threats, but with truth and patience, and as he gathered his papers and walked toward the door, the silence in the room followed him, broken only by the whispers of neighbors who now saw him not as the man who lost a parking spot but as the man who owned the road itself. Outside the air was cool and clean, the night sky stretched above him, and as he walked back toward his house his steps were steady, each one carrying the calm of a man who had endured humiliation, betrayal, and mockery, but had turned it all into victory. And as he reached his porch and looked once more at the sign that had once mocked him, he almost laughed, not with bitterness but with satisfaction, because now he knew the board's rule was finished. The neighborhood had seen the truth, and the street was his forever.